Yeah, very, very fascinating. I think people, including myself, like a couple of years back, don't really understand just how important nurseries are as a foundation for 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 the future, like and for high school and for university. And when I was younger, I had that belief. I was like, okay, it's just kind of like a daycare. The kids go, they read stories, they just sing, and it's just to keep them occupied. And then when you opened your first branch and you took me around and you showed me, I realized it's genuinely so much more than that. And the, the nursery that you choose or the nursery that you go to can have a really important impact on the years to come. And some of the things that I want to highlight and I want you to expand on are the way you guys celebrate birthdays. I think that's so cool and unique. Why you guys don't have fantasy like children's books, like some of them have, oh, like this unicorn and this unicorn became friends and whatever. Why you guys use real real images of animals, and so that the kids can have the right understanding of what an animal actually looks like. And then how you guys, when I came to visit the nursery, you had this really cool setup for learning about volume. So it was like these small cubes and how they like fit into one larger cube. And that was, I had been through high school, and that was pretty much the first time I had a hands-on math experience that taught me what volume as a concept is, not just as an arbitrary theory, but what it is and what it means to hold a 1 centimeter cubed object compared to a 3 centimeter cubed object, and how its changes is not linear, right? The change in volume is not linear to the change in length. And yeah, if there's anything else as well that you think that you guys do unique, please share that as well.
Yeah, so on the birthdays, the whole thinking around that is best ways to look at a child, that I use a lot with parents, and I do this at random times. I interact with parents sometimes on an airplane for a few minutes, and I'll see things, opportunities for, I wish this parent knew, like what was going on in this. So what can I, and say in this split second that could help. And one of the examples, one of the phrases I use is, they are little scientists. So if you look at any child, um, any young child, and you put that, that thought, you'll actually start observing it's true. Like everything they're doing is trying to discover how stuff works, like, and then it's the next thing, how does this work and that work. And sometimes the more you kind of like block that, the more they become these agitated kids, like, I'm gonna go play with this or play with that. But there was this funny video, I think it was the guy who invented mind maps, or someone who built a software around it. I can't remember. I need to dig up that video. But he basically played the role of a 1-year-old with a piece of paper, and he grabbed it and he sort of like crunched it up, and he thought, oh, interesting sound, the snakes crunch, 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 and then he like put it in his mouth and then spat it out. It's like, not good for food. Okay, so what is this thing good for? And then he ripped it. Oh, it's not very strong, and then he just throws it and he's like, whatever, and moves on to the next thing, right? But in that, the child is discovering, like, what is the purpose of this thing? And is it good for food? That's why I put it in my mouth. Is it good for food? No. Okay, spit it out. And so the idea is, if your child is this scientist, like discovering the world, what role? And this is like the key for me in this whole thing is trying to understand what is the purpose? What are we trying to do? We're trying to prepare children for life. What do children need? Like, what are their actual, what is going on inside of them? And then how do you, once that's answered, then how do you optimize yourself around that as parents and as a school and as basically the system around the kids, around the children. And so with that in mind, when a birthday comes up, yes, you could go, happy birthday to you, happy birthday. And, like, what does it mean to your own? But what is a birthday? Like, when you think about what is a birthday? What is a birthday? It's, well, he turned two. What does that mean? And it's something we celebrate. Why? Like, what? Okay. Well, what really happened is that the Earth went around the sun once. Like, that's actually what happened. That's, you're 20 years old. You're going to turn 21. That means the Earth went around the sun once, right? So the way we do the birthday, and this is how it's done in this system, which I found fascinating. And maybe the difference I bring is I get curious about these things. I don't just take them and I go, I wonder, why do we do it this way? And this is so cool. And what is it about that? Oh, it's because we're trying to use every opportunity to explain to children how the world works. So the way the birthday works is the parents are invited in. This is for the 3+ children who can handle parents coming in back to you get dropped off at school, you say bye to your parents, and then they come back and then they say bye again, and you're sort of old enough to handle it. The younger ones, it can get a bit too emotional, so we do the birthday without the parents. It's the teacher that does this. But the full experience when you're 3 to 6 years old is the parents are asked to prepare some pictures and a few short stories to share at the different ages of the child. So if it's a 4-year-old, it's some pregnancy pictures when you were in your mom's stomach, birth, turned 1, turned 2, turned 3, turned 4, right? And we ask the parents to bring those in, print out the pictures, and have a few things to share, interesting things to share about that. And so the children will sit in a circle. The classroom has this space where is a gathering spot. In this, if you remember the gym example, so all the activities are on the shelf, you're moving around, etc., doing your work, and then there are moments we come together. At the beginning of the day, we come together just to get started. There's something called grace and courtesy as well that gets discussed. Today we might discuss why do we not walk on a carpet that a child is working on, and how do we walk around it, or how do we use our words, not our hands, to resolve a conflict or an argument. So this is the children are used to getting into these circles. So we get into a circle. We're going to celebrate, let's say, Jad's birthday, and Jad's turning 4. And Jad's parents would come and they'd sit down, and the children are sitting in a circle. At the center, we've got some sort of representation of the sun. It could be a picture of the sun, a yellow something that represents the sun. And we explain to the children that imagine that's the sun that you see every day. And then Jad, whose birthday it is carrying some sort of representation of the earth. Now, typically in our classrooms, we have the globe. So he'll be carrying the globe or a smaller version of the planet. And the parents will start by saying, so before Jad was born, he was, in mommy's tummy, and this is a picture. And so the children are starting to understand that this Jad that they're looking at now was actually in their mom's tummy. And we take these things for granted, that you're a 3-year-old, you have a 1-year-old, your child might not know that they were a 1-year-old at one point, and they were like that other child, and that one day they will be like this other child, right? So this is where we kind of formalize this whole discussion of time and growth and development. And then Jad was born, so this is him at the hospital, and he was born in Montreal, and look, this is him crying, and this is him feeding, and whatever it is, and things about Jad when he's born. And then Jad will carry the globe physically, and Jad will walk around the circle, and we'll all sing the song. The earth went round the sun, the earth went round the sun, and Jad turned one. And you come back full circle. And sorry, before that, we circulate the pictures. So Jad will go to his friends, circulate the pictures of, look, this is me, and all the kids, oh, yes, very interesting, fantastic. And then Jad goes around the sun, Jad turned one. And then the pictures when Jad turned one, the parents will show. So now Jad is one, he's walking or crawling or whatever it is, and etc. And you can see where this is going, right? And so Jad again, the earth went around the sun, and he turned two, and at two, and at three, and at four. And now he's talking, and now he is who you see he is. And today, the earth went around the sun, finished its cycle around the sun. Just to, how these things marked me as an observer of these things, so when we first started implementing this, which is quite common, this is the Montessori way, if it's done correctly, of celebrating birthdays. There was this, we had just opened the second branch, and we had this child who was 5 years old, and he was in that class. So he'd been through a few of these birthdays, and his sister was upstairs in the toddler class, right? And so one day I see him. He comes to school, and he's at the gate, just entered, and he's looking at the house, and he's not moving, and he's looking up and looking down. He's looking up, and I was, I love these moments. Like I'm observing. I'm just sitting silently, trying to see what is going on. And just give me a second. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. So he's looking up, and he goes, when I was young, when I was a baby, I was in Julie's class, upstairs. And I looked at him. I don't like to lie to kids, right? So I was like, no, we just opened the school. So when you were young, you were in another school. But yeah, you were in maybe their baby class. And he goes, when I was young, I was in that class. So I didn't insist, but I tried. And then he looked at me and he said, but when I was in that class, I was a boy. So you can start to see, because of that birthday song and thinking about the concept of aging and time, he's starting to relate. And then he's got a younger sister. Oh, she's 2, and so look at what's going on in this. And he's like, I used to be like her, but I was a boy. And I was like, yeah, you were a boy, so he's reassuring himself that he was a boy. And so that's basically just a glimpse into, when you do things differently, how important they are. And this is one of the, we could talk later about why is it that education is not innovating as quickly as other areas. And one of them is nobody's picking up, or very few people are picking up on these things, or at least the people picking up on these things are not the ones running the schools. So you might have the really in-depth studiers of human development, but they're not the ones designing the curriculum, right? So we can talk later about how to close that gap. But all this stuff that's going on in children's brains is just not being picked up, basically. And someone will come and assess Taha and say, can he count to 10? And no, he can't, and no, he can. And this is somehow preparing him for life, right? So that's the birthday, and a glimpse into, if I said to parents, hey, what do you think? What's more natural? What makes more sense? So it's not like, let's invent a strategy for having birthdays that is somehow, if we found a better way, we'll find a better way, right? And we will. This idea is that this method continues to evolve based on what is happening in the world. It's not some sort of strategy that we recommend. It's just, we say, hey, do you want your child to sing the happy birthday song, or what about this? And look at what this teaches them, and so isn't it more natural to teach this way? On the fantasy thing, that goes back to, if you remember those stages of development, there are a lot of things going around. So those were the key concepts for the individual that we spoke about. But there are other things that are correlated to that. And one of them is children will, they're first of all very concrete, so that you don't develop an abstract abstract thinking is the ability to think about something that's not in front of you. So, for example, if I have let's imagine I have this sort of double-sided um, envelope. Just think of the white space here, right? And so if I'm playing with a 2-year-old and I say, what color is this? And they know the colors. They'll say, yellow or brown or whatever. And I'll say, what color is this? White. Great. And then I'll say, what color am I looking at? And they'll say yellow, right? Because they cannot put themselves in my perspective. Their perspective is they're still developing their eye that they can, but they're not able to develop the you yet, right? That's abstract. That's, if you think about it, it's just an incredible ability. Imagine an animal that could see what you were seeing. That would be crazy, right? But we have that skill, but it's not something you are born with. You develop it over time. So children are very concrete. So what they see in front of them is what they believe. When you say, I'm going to the airport, it doesn't mean anything to them until much later when they understand what those things are. And if you're out of their sight, they might think you've disappeared. And there's an age when they start realizing the permanence of things, that just because mom goes and comes back, she's not disappearing. She is coming back, type of thing. So one of the stages is before they're able to imagine abstract concepts, they believe everything they see and take it literally. And so at that age, if you knew that your child would literally believe everything that you said, one of the things you would do as a parent is you would not lie. So if you say to your child, you're at the airport and your child is you're showing a passport and they're curious, what is that? And you say, I'm busy now, like there's an immigration officer and I need to get to the queue, but listen, let's just get through this queue. I'll tell you later. I'll explain it to you later. If you forget or you think, they forgot, and you don't do that later, you'll get a teenager 15 years later or 10 years later saying, once you promised me, that you would get me this and you didn't, right? So you broke a promise basically, because children are very literal at that age. And so if you knew that, one, you would be careful to always say what is happening, what can and can't. And the other thing you would do is you would teach them about real things. So if you talk or read a story about a cow that flies, for you, it doesn't affect you because you understand that doesn't exist. For the child, they actually think there are cows that fly. And so the idea is you don't want to mix at this concrete stage when they take everything literally, you don't want to mix in fiction. Later on, once they have a very solid knowledge of reality and they can start to imagine, there's an age when you can pick up on this with children, when they can start to imagine. So when they're young and they're playing hide and seek, this is how they hide, I'm hiding because they can't see anything, so they assume you can't see them either. And it's literal, they can only see their perspective. Later on, they develop the skill of seeing what you see, right? And by the way, that grows with time. I can see what the person next to me sees. I can identify with my group, with my particular peer group. And very few people are able to develop and empathize and identify with people they don't even know and meet. And they become universally empathetic, right? So those are all skill sets. Just like a bicep curl that you can become better and better at. So that once they're able to imagine, then you can once they have a solid ground in reality, cause and effect. If you do this, this will happen. If, this is what a cow sounds like. This is what a dog sounds like. Then when they're able to imagine, you can say, imagine if cows could fly. Imagine if dogs could do that, etc. And it opens up this beautiful imagination space and satisfies that need, but it doesn't confuse them. And if you want this is, like we said before, when we start to see the impact later on, that can start to motivate people to go, what's the point? Like, who cares? What is the impact of this? What is the impact of this? I call it sort of Star Trek versus Captain America. So Star Trek is actually realistic fiction. The things that they were discussing and describing, many of them happened. So the iPad is something. There was something similar in Star Trek, and the reason was that the people developing Star Trek kept some sort of boundary of reality, and then they were imagining what could happen in 50, 100 years if technology, evolved and society evolved and all those things. Captain America and sort of the whole Marvel, etc., tends to, I find it very hard to get interested in these stories until actually recently they started to stop being black and white. It used to be good guy, bad guy, good guy, bad guy, and then they started to become a bit more nuanced, where the bad guy is actually has a good part and the good guy is not always perfect, etc. And they were just getting closer to reality, but inevitably. If anything is allowed, like, what's the point of a movie? Like, anything's allowed. So I can just push a button. I have this superpower, and why don't I just use it now? And then it's escapism. It's imagine I had all this power. Imagine I had this ability to just have this power to solve all my problems. And that typically, again, no criticism of these movies. They play a role. Recreation, escapism, coming up, and they might even inspire certain ideas, useful things, etc. But just paying attention to you'll be around friends around this age now who can balance. Maybe in, let's say, 5 years, people start working. Some can balance their books and some can't. And you've got a conversation that might go like this. I'm always in trouble with the credit card. I'm overspending, etc. And you go, well, let's look at what's going on. And you say, but you're making 10 and you're spending 12 every month. You're making 100 and spending 150. Like, this will not work. But why? I'm just spending the same way my friends are. And you really feel like there's something missing in, hey, you're not being realistic. You're not, and they want to escape to this world where I could just still do it and somehow magically it will be solved, right? So this is why it's so important at that age, when children are building this understanding of the world, literally cause and effect, that the books and the stories we tell them have to be around that. And so there are so many books around the human body, farm animals, sea animals, the dinosaurs. There's so much rich information that we can give children that is literally true and useful. The child who cries, the child who had a tantrum, the child who got a younger sibling, and there's more than enough content that is helpful and useful and supports their developmental needs rather than confuses it too early. And that's the fantasy thing. On the third thing, on the exercise that you worked with, it's called the binomial cube, and it's a little bit hard to explain without actually having it, but it is this incredible representation of an algebraic formula, which of course we don't talk about. Just like when we talk about length, we don't talk about meters to children. It happens to be a meter. But we do talk about this is very long and this is short and this is in between, etc. But to go just to give the principle, I think that's going to be very helpful around these activities. Science and math have infinite possibilities, where you can build. Using the rules of math and physics and science and chemistry, and you can build chairs and spaceships, right? And one of the problems with schools is that and schools have the right intention. It's not that all these schools we spoke about and universities and the parents, they are trying to do their best, and they think that's the way to do it. And one of the intentions is the same one: is we need to prepare children. We have to give them all this info and they have to memorize it so that they are ready for the world. And what we're saying is there's a better way to make them ready for the world. We're not having a debate about schools where they don't want to prepare children for life. That would be something else. They are genuinely interested in preparing children and students for life. But one of the ways that they're doing it is they're looking at all this knowledge, and the knowledge is growing, and it's growing exponentially. So AI, how will a university be able to adapt to ChatGPT if it just came out a couple of years ago, and you've got dozens of professors across hundreds of subjects? So just imagine the challenge when you're set up that way, which is we've got to get this knowledge in, and children have to memorize it. So trying to stuff the infinite possibilities into these 10, 15 years of education is mission impossible. And it's just getting harder and harder as the knowledge base of the planet grows, of humanity grows. And what it ends up being is this chaotic, piecemeal, stuffed info. It's not complete. And we don't have time to explain the whys and how did these things come about. We've barely got enough time just to try and cover some of the material, right? And children are getting it in different, so you're learning one day it's quadratic equations, the next thing it's something else, and you don't really know why, but it's just there's this race to try and stuff it into your head as quickly as possible. And it's memorized, so it's loose, it's not very strong. And so we all know where that goes. Meanwhile, math and physics, although they have unlimited possibilities, they actually have very defined and limited parameters. Somewhere in the order of 10 to 15. You've got length, width, height. Whether it's a table or a spaceship, you've got to use length, width, and height. You've got mass, whether it's a chair, spaceship, swimming pool, whatever. You've got things like friction. You've got temperature. You've got pressure, volume, right? So, and if you count all of those things out, they're limited. Instead of trying to stuff the unlimited possibilities in this chaotic way, which is mission impossible and getting worse every year and serves no purpose other than frustrating students, why not have them learn how to master those 10 to 15 qualities in math and physics, and then maybe give a few examples of how you could combine them, but they then combine them themselves into the infinite possibilities because they've mastered the key. We call them the keys to the universe, right? If you think about it, language is the same. Rather than you can't read a million books, or there's a limited number of books you can read. Maybe one day we'll download them all into our brains, but even the whole experience of how the book is relevant or not, you can't replicate this thing about reading a book over and over again. But so reading is critical, yes, absolutely. But constructing language, there are rules of how you construct. And if you learn how to construct, you can then build and write as much as you want. And then the others become examples. So let's get a bit of an example of this, an example of that. But you've mastered how to write and how to construct. And so this is why the classroom has the length exercise. It has the width exercise. It has the volume exercise. It has the temperature exercise. So we have temperature bottles, thermic bottles they're called, and two sets, one brown set, one white set, or whatever color. And then we'll put, ice cold, cool, room temperature, warm, hot water in these bottles in two. We'll mix them up, and then you have to match them, and you're really understanding temperature with your body rather than some sort of abstract concept. And later on, once you've understood it, we can start to talk about there are different ways to measure. How would I express it? Well, I'll express it using Celsius or Fahrenheit or Kelvin or whatever it is, rather than the other way around. Same thing with length. So you're practicing with your fingers, you're tracing something that is, and because it's a decimal system, it's always 10 pieces. They're exactly the same color so that your eyes will only notice the difference in length, nothing else. And that's one of the principles of how these exercises were built to basically help children master things really, really well, and then create the infinite possibilities.
Okay, so follow-up question for your vision on the future of nurseries. I remember earlier in the podcast you were mentioning the aspect of physical fitness in and how you want to incorporate that, or how it should be incorporated into universities. Is that something that you guys incorporate into your nursery? And also, I want you to talk about the experience that the kids get in the garden, and also the importance of being connected with nature and some of the activities they do, like planting. And while I was at my grandma's nursery, we had rabbits and we had chickens, and I think it was important for me to, interact with those animals, and it was a cool experience. So, do you mind just talking about that?
Yeah. Um, so just on the physical dimension, I think absolutely the way I see this is not a and should not be a fixed system of education. It should evolve with the needs and the reality that we're in. So what's an example of that? I use the physical dimension as an example, and the reason I use that example is when we look at pedagogical theory in the alternative space, it might not come up very frequently. And I think the reason for that is if you go back 100 years ago, when the Montessori method was, starting to emerge, when Maria Montessori was developing and refining her system, I would imagine that the children that she was around, were walking a lot during the day, and physical fitness might not have been something that was a concern. And why is walking so important? Just because our bodies were designed in such a way that we used to walk a lot, so things work better when we walk. Um, and so, if today children are growing up in an apartment, getting driven to school, driven here, driven there, and they're not getting those steps in, that's something that we should look at. Going back to what are the needs of children and are they being met, and then incorporate them into the curriculum. And I use that example as just because it wasn't there doesn't mean it shouldn't be, because now children have a different lifestyle than they did 100 years ago. Right? So that's just the broad and the broad background for that particular point. Um, right now, at this age group, there is a lot of movement. So that particular one is I think relatively well addressed. The spaces we have, the system itself, which is that children move around the classroom. We don't have desks where you sit in all day, or constant. Remember that circle time I was speaking about? Many nursery concepts are based primarily on circle time all day long, or most of the day. In this classroom, the children are always up and down the classroom, picking up a material from a shelf, moving it to somewhere where they find a spot on a carpet or on a rug or on a table, working with it, bringing it back. So there's a lot of carrying, walking, etc. And then all our campuses have large gardens. That's part of our approach. And so they get a lot of time out in the garden. So there's a lot of moving around and activities, bicycles that they can use, balancing beams, and other types of physical play. I think later on, when you look at the schools where you're sitting, 5, 6 hours behind the desk and getting this 1 hour of sports, I think that's where we should start looking at how to integrate sports and physical activity more into the system, and that should be one dimension. I think there should be a baseline of being able to walk. We can agree, X number of kilometers by this age. If you're a teenager, 1,000 years ago, walking to the well of the village to get water was something you did maybe every day. And if that's optimal for our health today, then and that's where we want to get to at age, middle school. Then how do we build that up to get to there? From that point, if then someone wants to become a marathon runner, an Ironman or woman, that's something else. But just as a baseline of health, being able to walk a few kilometers every day, if that's a baseline, then that should be integrated. Just to give another example, just to paint how this looks like, and it could go to all dimensions. One of the books, or one of the meditation centers or philosophers that I follow and read, remember this one story around something around when meditation was invented. You're talking thousands of years ago. You've got to imagine a place where you're in a village and you don't see strangers, maybe for weeks. And suddenly, one day someone comes and it's a big event. Who's this person? And people are asking them, like, hey, you travel village to village. You're like, what's going on? What goes on there behind the mountains? And so give us the news, because our lives, our routines, they're the same. Not much changes every day. And so give me information. And in that context, if we say sit still and meditate, that might not be something very difficult to do. Fast forward many years later, and you're bombarded with information. Your head is, overloaded with info left, right, and center. The ability to sit still and meditate might be extremely difficult, and it is for many people. And what this approach was talking about was, the need for dynamic meditation as a transition. So how do you meditate while walking or while doing sports or while remaining active? And so, to me, that's an example of how do you adjust education to the reality of where we are today, and how do you do that across many different dimensions? The need itself for quiet time might not have been, so high, but today the need for quiet time without a dopamine hit is critical, I think, for sanity. So that's another dimension that should be integrated, and that is something that we have. In the past, we did integrate into the school these showing children these moments of quiet time, or we have a whisper day where we try to make the classroom as quiet as possible, just to experience what it's like to take a break. So those, on two very different dimensions, those are examples of, as life evolves, as the reality of students, the context they're in changes, so too has the system. Should the system change as well? I think the universal principles remain the same. How do you prepare? But then, how do you might need to do things a little bit differently as things evolve. The connection to nature, I think it started off with just that's how my mom grew up. She grew up around animals. They had a large active garden where they had their chickens, they had their vegetables and fruits that they were growing. We come from a culture where farming is extremely important. So and she knew how important these things were for children, and she wanted them to her students to be exposed to animals and nature. And over the years, we've had everything from the school goat to turtles, rabbits, chickens, plant, and then of course planting our own vegetables. And it's completely different, a completely different experience to have a child where you teach them, a tomato from a flashcard. So this is a picture of a tomato and a picture of a banana, a picture of an apple, and you have them say it to you, versus here's a real tomato, and today we're gonna carve out the seeds. We're gonna, and we're gonna make a salad with the tomato, eat the tomato, etc., and then take those seeds, plant them in our pots in the garden, and then we're gonna water them. And a few days later, we're gonna see a shoot, shoots coming out of the ground, and then eventually something green will come out. We'll taste them. We'll see that they don't taste good, so we're gonna have to wait until they're ripe. So you're learning language as well. And then finally, a red tomato comes out again, and you take that tomato back to the class, carve out the seeds, and make a salad. And they understand the cycle of the tomatoes. And then you show them one other, so that they don't think it's just about tomatoes. You show them one other, maybe a cucumber or something like that. And then I think that's one of the secrets of education. You go deep with a couple of examples where you understand the full cycle, and then the child can carry on and project that out, for all the fruits and vegetables. They understood the cycle of how things grow. Versus, and in the beginning, it seems a bit slower, right? So I could sit a child down and go through the flashcards. Child one is planting a tomato. Child two is going through the flashcards of all the fruits and vegetables. And then on a test, looks like child two is doing better. That child can say banana, apple, orange, etc. But they don't know what a tomato smells like, tastes like, where it comes from, right? The other child, you're spending more time going a bit deeper. And then eventually, once you're done, then you can go to the flashcards and you can say, hey, you saw those two. This applies to all of these in slightly different ways. And they will both go to an exam now and get an A. But once they get to real life, child one is way more prepared than child two. And that's an example of why grades, don't necessarily mean what people think they mean. You can have some kids that are really switched on. They understood the root principles because they're curious of a certain subject, and they get an A on the test, or they get the root principles and they don't like this whole story of regurgitating and they don't get an A on the test, but that they did learn the subject. And then you have kids who will memorize and then forget and get an A and haven't learned, or they think, even worse, they think they know the subject, and they go out to the world and the real world, and they're just rattling off things they've memorized without really understanding how to use them in the right context and how to think about them. So nature is critical for us. It's part of our core curriculum in how we choose our locations. And it's, by the way, if you find yourself in nature and you're experiencing this sense of this is nice, it's because we were always exposed to nature. Again, it's in our genes, hundreds of thousands of years of being in relationship with trees and open scenery and mountains and seas and landscape and seeing as far as the eye can see, and animals, and then being in cubicles for 8 hours a day. It makes sense why we go on holidays and go into nature, etc. This is something that is part of our genetic makeup, and we should find ways to stay exposed to that, stay connected to that from as early an age as possible.
Yeah, on the nature bit, I do find myself missing it from time to time, and I try to reframe my view on nature. And I don't know if you've seen my cold shower video, but whenever I would do the cold plunges, when I would go with other people, I would notice they would have to get themselves motivated and get themselves hyped up, so they jump in, and then it's like they're fighting the water. It's this big challenge. And the perspective that I like to look at it is, we've been living in nature for, as you said, hundreds of thousands of years, and we've learned to adapt to it. And I think people underestimate the capabilities of the human body and how adaptable we are to our surroundings. And so the approach I like to take is, no, you don't need to see the cold water as a challenge. It's something that you should be one with. And so the approach I take is breathing, meditating, and I can last way longer by doing that in the cold, and rewiring my brain to view it as, I don't want to say a pleasurable activity, but not as a punishment, let's say. And quick, this reminded me of a side tangent. This also applies to when parents use exercise as a punishment for their kids. I really, as someone who's super passionate about the field, that just hurts my heart, seeing kids attribute push-ups. You'll see it in PE class as well, attributing push-ups and cardio as a punishment, where it should be viewed as a opportunity to improve your health, and you should be grateful for the fact that you can do push-ups. I wanted to ask you a quick question. Growing up, I remember every time when I was younger, I used to do it more. Every time I was really happy that I did something. I got a good, maybe let's say in like grade 1 or 2, I got a good grade, or I won an award in something, and I would come up to you and I would say, hey, like, look what I did. And then instead of saying like bravo in Arabic, or saying, oh, congratulations, you would say, you should be proud of yourself. So can you explain why you did that?
I remember that more from. I don't remember you ever coming in with like a grade that you were proud of, or that you really cared much. Although you always were a good student, you knew how to work the system. But it was where I remember that more was scoring a goal in soccer, or and this was back then. Even back then, before I went so deep into education, and specifically early childhood education, just from my own personal observations and my extensive reading, I knew this and was wary of this connection between projecting my own ambitions onto my children, right? So I was, as much as possible, trying to stay aware of that and keep that out of it. So what did that mean? I love soccer, as you know. I continue to play today. When you guys were young, I was playing 3 times a week in those days. I love tennis as well. I grew up playing tennis. And I was very aware of not trying to push any particular sport. And what that meant was, when, I think you guys expressed to your mom, from watching me play tennis when we were living in South Africa, that you wanted to play. And I remember feeling really happy. But because I was conscious of and careful about that pushing something that I wanted onto you guys, I could pay attention to the source of that. What was that? That was, this is me. This is from inside of me. It's not about you guys. And so I would purposefully not overdo it, or I would try to keep that out of it, basically. And it ended up that the two of you, played tennis and then lost interest. And because I wasn't attached, I was trying not to be attached, and at the very least trying not to let it affect my actions, I let it go. And later on, as teenagers, I think it was Faye who restarted. You guys picked up tennis, and it became then a habit for life, right? And it's great. So it happened to be a sport that you guys picked up. It would have been very different if I was the one sort of pushing it, and then it became about making me happy, and getting all of that confused with something that is already quite complicated. Your relationship with the sport, and are you enjoying it or not enjoying it, and then I have to make dad happy or he'll be disappointed. I just didn't want that for you guys. I wanted to keep it, let's say, as clean, so-called clean, as possible, and really keep it about your experience. So when you scored a goal, and of course, just like the other parents there was this surge of pride and happiness, and my son did this or that. But I also was conscious of, obviously there's a bias, like you're my son, so that particular happiness is a biased view of a parent. And I did not want you to play for me. I, because of the journey I went through trying to figure out what I wanted, and as we spoke about in the last podcast, it wasn't easy because I was pushing all of that down in order to focus on academics, on what's important. And I had to go through that journey of reconnecting. I was very conscious to try and minimize that for you guys. And in general, in education, that's something that is a core principle at the school. Why do we focus on autonomy? All kids, naturally, we have a desire to be free and independent, and make decisions and roam around and have freedom to choose and freedom to live in our own way. If it's suppressed at a young age, it causes issues later on. So I would then pay attention to that and say, okay, this is the pride of a father, and this should be my experience, and how I would find ways to interact with you in those moments was, he's happy, and I'd like him to connect that happiness to his own work. So you played that shot, it really worked this time. And so what do you think worked? What was it about the build up to this goal? It's more interesting. You're actually learning about, what worked, what didn't work, but you're relating it to you and what you did and what your teammates did. And you're relating it to your hard work and your skill and your practice got you that result or didn't get you that result. Right. And that's much more scientific than like you're making me happy and now you're scoring goals to make me happy, type of thing. That I know where that journey goes, right? That's the journey of not being connected with what makes you happy. And so, that's I was quite obviously I must have missed certain things, and I didn't know, and I'm still learning today. But that was one that I was quite aware of. And I remember your sister got really good grades, and like I said, on the grades specifically, I was very very cautious. To it's already a bigger deal than it should be, I think, in schools, and I didn't want to add to that. And so she got really good grades in her APs, and very proudly came. And as I said before, I'm preparing you guys for. I know this is very exciting, but believe me, in a few years' time, no one's gonna care. And so I'd rather you guys not get the shock. Not I don't want to build up this cliff to a higher point that you fall off. You're gonna fall off it anyway. So, I got, straight A's and or fives on the APs, and I said, again, okay, what's the formula? Right, you're wow, great, like your hard work, paid off. And she got upset, she said, you never say bravo. And it was an opportunity to explain to her. And I said, what, are you getting the grades for me, or are you getting them for yourself? And so I'm doing it on purpose because you shouldn't be doing them for me. And by the way, you're excited about the grades. I think you should be excited about the fact that you're able to work hard towards something. This particular goal has an expiry date, which is the end of university. And hopefully you can take that skill of when you put your mind to something, you work hard, it gets your results. So that's really what we should be focusing on, rather than the grades as some sort of destination.
Yeah. Two things I want to say for that. I think how that showed up later in my life, and I'm thinking about this on the spot. So retrospectively analyzing my life, I'm the type of person that doesn't really feel the need to always verbalize my ambitions to everyone. I'm more of the person who I like to, okay, have a clear-cut plan of what I want to do, and then I like to prove my competence through my actions. And so let's take my personal brand. I'm doing a podcast now and I have the YouTube channel. I don't think I told anyone that I was planning on starting it, with the exception of you. And I think we had one conversation about it, but I've had that plan in my head for maybe 2 years. And I think it does stem back to that work you put in, because I always think about, okay, why do I need to share this with other people? Am I doing it for them? Am I starting a personal brand for them? No, I'm doing it for myself. And I think if you're truly doing something for yourself, you don't always feel the need to share it with other people. And there's nothing wrong with sharing it with other people. But I think it just came up naturally for me to, if I was in a discussion with someone and then they asked me, oh, what are you doing with your life now? I'd say, yeah, I'm starting a personal brand. But I wouldn't just start the conversation by throwing it out there for the vanity of starting a personal brand. And we could go down this whole other spiral of vanity and people starting their business, and the first thing they want to do is, set up their logo, set up their trademark, have a fancy office, and their business isn't even bringing in money. And so I think that was a really valuable skill, which I'm grateful for. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, looking from a psychology of sport perspective or lens, a statistic that I always find amazing, which I learned recently, is the top hockey players in Canada usually come from small towns. And they usually get into the sport at a later age. It's not, you would think, okay, who are the best hockey players? Okay, they must be the kids who their parents put them in a very strict early specialization into hockey at the age of 4. Just like, I don't know if this is just a stereotype of kids in China playing ping pong at like age 4 and doing it for 8 hours a day. So the statistic is saying no, it's actually the kids that grow up in small towns, the ones that discover that they have a lake in their neighborhood. They go with some friends and then they play, and then they fall in love with the sport, and then they play for hours and hours and hours and hours. And later, once they develop that passion for the sport, then they ask their parents, can you teach me? Can you send me to this school? I wanna become better at hockey. And it's those kids that truly know what they want. They're not doing the sport for the vanity. They're not doing the sport because they want the fame. And that's usually why kids will quit after 5 or 6 years of playing a sport. they'll realize they can't become the next Messi or Ronaldo, and they're not willing to put in the work that it takes to become an amazing athlete. And that's one of the distinguishing factors, which I find really, really fascinating.
That ties in very well with the with one of the principles of the future of education, which is we spoke about, which is that seed of interest, of self-interest, and not self of being interested in the topic first, and then the knowledge, you'll grab the knowledge rather than people trying to stuff it inside of you when you're not the one bringing that in. We call that self-constructed knowledge, and that's one of our principles at the school. What you spoke about earlier, the motivation, like this is a key and important topic, which is intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. And there's a great book by a guy called Daniel Pink called Drive, that is a small book that talks about this, how we're all born intrinsically motivated. There's no 1-year-old that's exploring around them in order to get a BMW, or they're exploring for the pleasure of exploring, because it's an evolutionary impulse. It's a method of survival. It's interesting. And somewhere, somehow, some of us become extrinsically motivated, and some retain the intrinsic motivation, or some combination of the two. And sometimes we lose it and we get it back. I think I kind of fit more into that last bucket, like as I said, where the motivation was always the grades and the praise from the teachers, the ranking, this pride of I'm better than. So my pleasure comes from comparison rather than some sort of inner joy, and it's very temporary. It lasts only until the next ranking comes out, so one of the principles of parenting and education is, how do you protect that intrinsic motivation to keep it intrinsic, basically. And so we call it freedom from praise and punishment. You should do things for the pleasure of discovering them, and for the pleasure of experiencing the joy of success, of doing things well, not to get a bravo, to please these people who are very important to you. Obviously, your parents are so important. So getting this bravo when first of all from your parents turns into getting grades in school, how it looks to others, getting praise, and then eventually you come out of the system and you think, I'm done with the adults. I'm an adult now. It's not about what my parents want and what there are no teachers anymore. I'm independent. And then you're chasing the outcomes of success, not the journey. You're chasing the material outcomes. And so this car or this house, and really what you're doing without realizing it is you're trying now to please society. So it goes from pleasing your parents, pleasing teachers, maybe and parents, and then eventually we're running around as adults trying to please society. If I have these nice looking cars in my garage, the other neighbors will think that I am successful. And it's very shallow. It doesn't last. You have to keep going at it, and it's actually the wrong sport, he calls it. So you're trying to play basketball with a tennis racket. You're trying to find inner happiness by surrounding yourself with these external things, and that game, it's just impossible to win that game. As opposed to reconnecting with what intrinsically motivates you, doing what you love, and then the results come, and you go, great, I'm really glad it's doing well financially. People realize that I'm adding value. Excellent. And I continue to add value, and then enjoy. But if the material things come and go, the passion of doing it remains.
Mm. Yeah, well said. I wanted to add something to the part I had said before. I also, on purpose, sometimes don't verbalize my ambitions because I want to prove to myself, or I want to prove to myself that I'm truly doing it for myself. And I think that's a good test. If you're truly motivated to do something and you can do it without having others around you knowing exactly like the reason why you're doing it, that could be a good indicator that you are doing it for yourself. Before
That's
we
very good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Before we move on to the macro view of things and end off the podcast, wanted to share the story of how, and I forgot some details, so I might need you to fill some things in. Do you remember when I was around? I think it was between the age of 12 and 15. I I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Teta or you signed me up for this program where they teach you how to eat, basically. Was it you or Teta?
So no, it was a lady who was a parent at the school, and she ran this program after hours and told us about it, and we signed you up for it. And it was some sort of, I want to say, etiquette. So this is why you're saying how to eat, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
But the idea was to be aware of how you do things and trying to connect with that. So I don't actually know a lot about what went on inside the class, but maybe you can tell us.
So what I wanted to say is just now, at my current age, at the age of 20, and having started my own business in the summer, I am only now grateful for that experience. And I just wanted to reflect back on it and just talk about how cool of an experience it was and how beneficial it was for me, and how small things like that are just neglected in school, even though they have so much importance. So essentially what we would do is, for the first couple of weeks, we would just have, it was like me and 3 other kids my age, and then the teacher. We would all just sit down. Suki.
Her name was Suki.
Yeah, her name was Suki. And so me, the other kids, and Suki, we would sit down and we would have dinner. So the first day we just ate, and she just, looked at us, observed us, saw how we were eating. And I was always a messy eater. It's pretty, I have that label. I had that label as a child. There's a funny video of me and my cousin. So my cousin Kian, he's the chef of the family. Very, very proper ever since he was a kid, and he takes it from his dad, Riza, who is also very similar, very neat, very tidy, very respectful. And there's an amazing video. I think you were filming, and we were at a restaurant, and the video starts with Kian, and he's eating spaghetti. And he's I think, how old was he? Maybe like 4 or 5?
This was the summer after 2009. You were 6 and he was 4. 5.
Yeah, so he was 5.
Yeah.
He's eating his spaghetti with, he puts the spoon and then he takes the fork, and he's using the spoon as like the wall for which he can twist the spaghetti onto his fork so that he can eat it without making a mess. And then the camera pans to me, and it's just me with my fingers in the spaghetti like this, tomato sauce all over my shirt, having the time of my life, smiling, not caring. And it was such a funny video because it shows how different we were at that age. And that pretty much continued. I mean, you at some point told me like you can't eat that way. Basically, like you need to have some respect for, you know, the table and eating properly. And but it was still, I remember, a slight, I don't want to say issue, but something to work on. So anyways, I went to the school with Suki. I'm sitting with the three kids and Suki's there. And then the first day she's just observing us, and you know, I think I'm doing everything right. Then the second day and comes, and she explains to us exactly how to set up a table and how to eat a 3-course meal from start to finish. And my mind was just like blown at how badly I was doing everything. So the first thing is, you know, setting up the plates and the forks. And she did a really good job of actually explaining what's the purpose of these things. And she would throw in cool historical facts about the origins of these things. And I still remember them to this day. So the way you set up the table is you have your fork and your knife, and your fork and then your knife and I think it's your knife and your spoon on the other side, and your knife is on the right because you cut with your right hand. And you start with the cutlery that you're going to use for the first course, then the second course, then the third course. And the reason why is, you know, when you're using your small spoon for the soup, you finish the soup, you put the spoon in the bowl, and then they take it away. And then when they serve you the first course, you then progress to the next set of cutlery. And one of the cool historical facts she mentioned was, in the olden days, the direction of which your knife was pointing. So you know how the knife has, you know, the sharp edge and then it has the dull edge. If your sharp edge was pointed out, which nowadays we never do, every time you set up the cutlery, it's always should be pointing in. If you go to a formal restaurant, they'll have it pointed towards your plate. The reason why is that was a sign that you wanted to kill the person next to you. So I thought that was fascinating. And then so those small facts stuck with me. And then, you know, once you set up the plates, you take the napkin, you put it on your lap, and you keep it there for the meal. And that's just, if anything falls, it stops your pants from getting dirty. Then I want to say final exam, but completely did not feel like an exam at all. It was the coolest exam, at least I've done. We went on a trip to Atlantis, and we went to a formal restaurant. And, you know, it's these three kids, small, all dressed, you know, formally, and Suki. And we just had a 3-course meal from start to finish. We ordered steak. And she also taught us things like how to be polite to the waiter, and how to be respectful of your surroundings. Maybe not eat while you're not talk while you're eating, because, you know, you're gonna spit food everywhere. And and so yeah, the course finished, and then I only realized how important that was when I went on my first date, and I realized, imagine I was sitting in front of this girl just eating like I did as a 6-year-old. Like, I think she would have run away. There's no way anything would have progressed. And then and they actually, from the dates I've been on, one of the girls actually recognized that I eat properly, and she complimented me about it. And I think that's something, being a gentleman is part of, it's something that's part of being a gentleman, is knowing how to eat properly. And I think it's an amazing skill that should be taught in schools but isn't. And it was also really important when I started my business, and I was having, you know, some formal dinners with my coach, with my business coach, and some formal dinners with my employees. It was important for me to show that I'm a competent individual and that I can eat properly, because to be honest, if I'm having dinner with someone and they're just abysmal at eating, I don't want to say that I'd respect them less, but it would it would stick with me, and there would be a small part of me that thinks, why, if they're not competent in this and they haven't put in time and energy to improve how they eat in front of people, what else are they not doing? So just a cool
Yeah.
and funny
So,
story.
once the recording's out, I'll share that with Suki. She'll be very happy, and I think that's actually one of the challenges of education is that the work that gets done has impacts far later on in life, and connecting those two circles is very difficult. So whereas a restaurant, you go into a restaurant, if the food is great, you review it, and people immediately have access to that information. And if the reviews start going up, the restaurant's going up. If the reviews are bad, either the restaurant sorts it out, but they see the results quickly and they have to act quickly. You could mess around, with teaching kids the wrong things and the wrong way, and the results only come out far later in life when the kids realize those things, and then it's too late to go back. So one of the things I like to keep in mind, and it was actually one of the ideas for when we were thinking about how do we explain this to parents. This is the school. We'd say this is the school that your kids would choose. Once they're older, if they could whisper in your ear, they'd say, "Please choose this school because this will help me in my life," right? And when your children are 1.5 years old, they're not able uh, to tell you these things, right? So that's one of the challenges of education.
Yep, agreed. So we'll take it to the macro view, and we'll start off with the question: why has there been little
Okay,
to
can I just interrupt you?
yeah,
I think there's an important point and
yeah, go
around,
for it.
especially when we're talking about a topic like etiquette. There's a lot of potential for this whole etiquette thing to be taught in a very stuffy, just do it because you have to do it type of way. And this is an example of an educator basically respecting who you are as individuals and shaping the course in a way that builds you up rather than being rushed to sort of get to the result. Like you can imagine basically shouting your way through this thing at kids and going, you have to eat this way or else, and there's consequences, etc., versus she really wanted you to see the beauty of it. So same content offered in a completely different way with historical facts to make it fun, with the experience. So you connect Atlantis, the wild water park, fun thing, with this formal dinner, like little gentlemen, and completely different end game and results. Yeah, sorry. So just thought I'd make that observation.
Yeah, no, good observation. So yeah, looking at the macro view of things, we'll start off with the question: why has there been little to no progression in the education system in the West over the past, let's say, 40, 50 years?
I think there are two big factors. One of them we've already spoken about: the gap between the result of the work, which comes out many years later, in whether the student is prepared for life or not, whether they're happy or not. So that's, I think, in the field of education, it's the parents making a decision, but the impact is on the child, and the result comes much later, right? So the feedback loop is very long, and so it takes a really special effort for people to hold on to that, to make those connections and hold on to them when they're educating these children. It's very tempting on the one hand to say, give me more time. If we plant this tomato, yes, I know this other child is now rattling off 20 fruits and vegetables because you sat with them, and it looks like they're doing better. But eventually, this approach will be better, and they will get to so. And you'd have to trust me on this. Not because the food tastes better that you're in the restaurant, the food tastes better, or the seat is more comfortable on the plane, or there's an immediate result, but because, and here's some evidence, and here's here are some facts, right? So the customer is not the consumer, is the one of the issues, and the pressure of what's obvious and what's sitting there, it can be greater than the trust in the different way, right? So the grades, letting go of this grades thing is a very big deal for people. They grow up with these things, they think they're important, the teacher's telling them it's important, and so it's hard to let go. So that's one of the big factors. And then the second one, I think, is that in most countries, education is in the public sector, not the private sector. And the public sector is extremely slow in most countries, the vast majority of countries. You're now in the bureaucratic systems of a country, and we know how slow and that can be. So when you combine these things together, it just makes it very, very difficult to innovate. It really does require a special effort, which is also why I think this is not something that there will be incremental change, but the gap is so big that I think these institutions might have to be completely bypassed. They will not, the amount of change that is required from them is so great because they haven't been doing these things and they've been relying on their history, that the change has to be revolutionary in some cases. On a positive note, you have things like co-op programs starting to pop up and become more common, bringing the practical aspect of work and meshing it in with education, which is the way it should be. There's a reason why you're learning this theory. It's to go and apply it. And bringing those two together is always a great idea. You get to see how it gets applied. Then the theory makes more sense. So I think those are the two main reasons why it's extremely slow.
So going on about the fact that schools are in the public sector, do you think there's something to be said about big establishments and, let's call them, the elites, wanting to control the education system? So just a thought experiment. If we educated everyone in schools about debt and about how credit cards work, you would expect that less people would be going into crumbling debt when they're older, or as soon as they graduate from high school, and they'll know how to use and manage their credit card better. That, I'm assuming, would bring in less revenue for the banks, who make money off people having to pay interest on their debt and on not paying their card. So do you think there's something to be said about those incentives?
I mean, I definitely agree that it is an outcome. Whether it's by design, I guess depends on the situation. I have seen instances in the past, for example, where in some countries they want to change the history curriculum to suit the needs of a particular nation or some sort of narrative that they're basically propaganda that they're pushing. So that's definitely a factor to consider, and it depends which system you're under, which is why innovative education will do better in places where governments give the freedom to institutions to innovate, and to do so basically to give parents and those educators the freedom to choose systems that make sense to the parents, and where government authorities play the role they should be playing, in my view, which is making sure that the contracts are upheld. Um, so, the safety measures are upheld, the commitments that the school makes are upheld, and that parents have recourse. If someone promises you X, Y, and Z, and doesn't, just like any contract you make or any purchase you make, but doesn't dictate a particular curriculum. So I use the example of electric cars. If there are inspectors, there are government inspectors, and they play a very important role in the automotive industry, which is to make sure that cars match a certain safety rating. Like, as a customer, there's no way you can know how a car will perform if it has an accident at 40 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, or whatever it is. And that's why having a government crash testing program is an excellent idea. As a manufacturer, you have to run some samples through those tests and prove that they meet certain requirements and they don't crumble and kill passengers at very low speeds, and you get ratings for that. I think that's an excellent role for a government authority. A second one would be emissions. As we try to reduce emissions, the government measures, what kind of emissions a car has and whether they meet the safety requirements and the emission reduction plans of any particular government. Where things can get difficult, let's say you've got an inspector, and I use this example for schools. You've got an inspector that is looking for your emissions, and for the right reasons. So I want to see what your emissions are, and you've built an electric car, and you say, there are no emissions. And if you have an inspector that needs to do their job, they're going to keep asking for those emissions until eventually you stick some sort of exhaust pipe on an electric car just to satisfy this inspector, because otherwise they'll fail your vehicle and you won't be able to sell it. This is where an electric car company would have to engage with the authorities and say, just so you guys know, crash testing, absolutely, we'll go through that, but we need an exemption for the emissions because, and here's the proof, we don't have an exhaust. There's no, there are no emissions. And if we've proven that to you, then we don't need this particular test. Same thing in schools. If you've built a curriculum where an inspector comes in and says, show me your grade 6 and your grade 7, and you say, well, actually, we group our students together into their psychological stages of development. So 6 to 9 and 9 to 12 collaborate together, and you have the 6-year-olds learning from the 8 and 9-year-olds, and you have the 9-year-olds playing a leadership role with the 6-year-olds and showing them how they master certain topics. An inspector that wants to see those specific grades will have a problem and could fail your school because it doesn't meet this particular requirement. Or they might have a requirement if they think that being high tech means you have an iPad in every classroom. For me, being high tech means you have a very solid understanding of math, cause and effect, logic. You have character, hard work, etc. And then later on, with that strong character, you play with the tools of technology. You use them. But bringing that in too early, for me, is not necessarily the right thing to do. So those are examples of there have to be discussions with the authorities so that they play the role that is very important, that they do play to protect the parents, to protect the schools as well, but that they don't then stifle innovation because they're expecting things to look like the traditional schools, especially if those changes need to be quite dramatic from what we have today.
then how can we implement some policy or some incentives for the education system to improve?
That's a good question. I think it depends on which environment we're talking about, which country we're talking about. There are certain countries where it's already very easy to build innovative schools. The issue is not the regulators. It could be other things. The incentive is already there. It's just maybe not yet uncovered. The incentive is that it delivers better results with happier students. So I'm not sure. It's not something that needs to be, for example, subsidized. It's not more expensive. It's not like green energy where you have to say this is experimental and let me potentially subsidize it for 10 years until it has critical mass, and then I can remove the subsidies, and that gives it the boost it requires. So this is basically the knowledge exists. These schools already exist. They're just in little pockets here and there. They might not, or there might be bits and pieces in certain systems that we have to put together. And there might be different versions that work in different parts of the world, depending on the circumstances, the resources available, the space, the budgets, etc. I would, as an entrepreneur, I focus immediately on what are the obstacles to remove. The incentives are there. I mean, the results are speak for themselves. It's just really doing it, proving it, and there are already parents and educators who are going to be early adopters of these types of systems because they've experienced these things themselves. They've seen how the current system doesn't work, and once they come on board and the results come out, then maybe the laggards, the parents who need a bit more proof to jump on board will follow. So it's already happening. I mean, the systems are changing. They're changing at the age groups that are easier to take a risk on. So it's at the early years when you talk about autonomy, freedom. You tend to get more leeway. As the pressure of getting into university mounts, the willingness of parents to take risks diminishes. So it gets more difficult as you get into alternative elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. Fortunately, at the younger ages where this is critical, as we said, because of the absorbent mind. So if you respect the intrinsic motivation of a child, show them that they can be autonomous, give them that confidence, they have that resilience, they can then enter into a traditional system and they will behave in a very different way than a student that is frustrated, doesn't understand what's the purpose. They will find purpose. Even if the teacher doesn't explain it, they'll go and ask the questions. They'll go, why? So someone might say to you, this is the way you do this or that. But if you're that type of student, you'll go and figure it out. There must be a reason why it's that way. And so you kind of yourself make your education more purposeful. And I think that's what's going to continue to happen until schools are available to support that even more. So I think it's happening. It's changing. It is a little bit slow. Slower than, for example, IT development. Someone invents a new technology for a phone, and within a couple of years, Every manufacturer on the planet has rolled it out. Education, it goes a bit more slow, but I think once it hits a certain critical mass, it will become the new norm, and that will take a bit of time. But the movement is already happening. There are bits and pieces happening all over the world already,
Mm.
and yeah, I'm sure it'll continue.
I just have a quick question about, so let's say we'll use the two differentiating terms of an innovative system and the the original system. So we'll take, let's say, your nursery as the innovative one, and every other, just for the sake of the analogy, as the original system. So you were saying, okay, for nurseries, it's less risk because we can still use this innovative system, but then parents don't have to worry about their child not being able to conform with the original system of middle schools and high schools, because they still know the fundamentals of math and they can then still pass the SAT. Looking then at designing a high school, do you think it's going to be, if you were to hypothesize the plan of how these up and coming innovative schools are going to form, do you think it's going to be an innovative school that comes along and says, okay, we're going to be innovative in this way, but if your child graduates from our school, they can still go they can still go to university, which is, we'll call the original system? Or do you think it's them just they're gonna do their own thing completely, ignore university, so you're not gonna be worrying about getting SAT scores, and you're not going to be worrying about doing AP tests and meeting the eligibility requirements of universities? And do you think they're going to just set on their own course? And what would that look like? And if there is an innovative high school created, but no university or no continuing education set up, what will that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely think it's going to be the root of uh, this works better even in the current system. And as I said, with the example of the tomato, so um, it's not that tests shouldn't exist. As I said, it's how you use those tests. So this is more about the mindset of those schools and how they go about doing their things. Wanting children to learn and then assessing if they did learn is absolutely a part of the system. And the SAT test for do I think the SAT test is the right test for every single major out there? No, I don't think a student that wants to go into art needs to go through the entire SAT test as it is today. But do certain majors, is it a good test for certain competencies? Absolutely, and that should be the logic of any test that remains. One is, how useful is this? If we were thinking of rather than thinking of university as it is today with this SAT test, you imagine the Olympics with a 100-kilo snatch, or what's the maximum weight you can snatch, and what's the maximum speed you can run, right? Let's say those were the two tests. Now the Olympics has boxers and weightlifters and horse riders and javelin throwers and just so many different specialities. Sometimes those tests don't really correlate with with really checking how successful would these students be in those fields. So I see it the same way. I see that, yes, there will be assessments, but we have to have discussions about how useful are these assessments for what we want to do, And certain things you can imagine, I might be presenting a portfolio of work rather than a math test. I can definitely see for engineering and finance, absolutely. Is there a need for it? There is, but for others, not so. And the second, even more important thing is how are we using those assessments? And it's not just one final assessment, but all along the way, how are we using those assessments to see if the children are developing, the students are developing or not? And then the onus is on us, on the adults, to change what we do. So that's why the classroom has to be this dynamic space. The adults have to be open, the teachers, to those assessments are for you, not to rank students, but they're for you to readjust, how you're doing. These children did not connect with math. What do we need to do to get there? How do we change things around? How do we get them interested? And I think the system, and this is how it works today, the system has to work where, unfortunately it does, the children, the students are better off going through the more natural approach later into a traditional approach. They will do better than others, or better than what they would have done had they gone through a traditional approach. So if you've spent 3 years with people fostering your intrinsic motivation, your autonomy, and then you go into a traditional school where maybe a lot of that goes away. You have to go to the bathroom, you need to ask for permission. You have to, everything needs a permission request. But you've practiced it for 3 years. You're able to reconnect with that much more easily than someone who's never had it. Now, if you've practiced it for 6 years, even better. You can take a child at age 6 who goes then into a traditional school. You can actually talk to them about it because they're at old enough. You can say there are new rules in this school. In this school, they expect you to do this and that, and it's not affecting who you are as a person. It's like you travel to a country where, or you go to the beach and you walk around without a shirt in your shorts. Then you go to the shopping mall. You might not dress that way because there's a different protocol, but you yourself didn't change. Your identity didn't change. You're just adapting to the circumstances and the environment around you. So I think absolutely the alternative systems have to continue working in the traditional system, and they do if they're done the right way. So you should perform better at math. There should be no compromise. This should not be, you have a happier child, but they're not going to be very strong at math, which is why we like the approach that we follow, which is complete, which had both. Certain systems might say, we'd rather not, math is only for certain people. We think math is beautiful, and everyone would love math if they were taught math in the right way. Math is a way that humans figured out how to control their environment. It's a universal tool. It's just teaching it in the right way and allowing a child to self-construct their knowledge. So the SAT then becomes a project. If you've gone through a schooling system where your autonomy is fostered, etc., and then you say, look, there's this SAT and that opens up a door to something. It becomes a project. You go tackle it, you break it up into pieces. But if you've got that character, if you've got the autonomy, if you've got the thinking, first principles thinking, asking what's the purpose of what I'm doing, and you sit through those very same lectures in the same universities, you will get out of it far more than someone who's just, what I see is they've either bought into the system and they're just chasing the grades, or the ones that have kind of checked out of the system and are just sort of struggling along, trying to wait until the day that they don't have any or they drop out or whatever it is. But someone who has practiced self-constructed knowledge will sit through those very same lectures and the beautiful content, the beautiful books, but they will look at it in a different way. They will, embrace it in a different way. We can go through a history lesson in an extremely, boring, what date did this happen, and this and that, or you can engage in it, and we can watch a movie about a historical event, and and master that knowledge, and you'll know the dates because you're interested and you've kind of connected the dots of when World War One and World War Two, because this happened, blah blah blah, and you're getting the grades in this traditional system, but you're getting out of it in education. So, and once a better university comes out, then great, you go to that university, and now all the professors are encouraging you to self-construct. So it's not just you. So the answer is, it's transitional, definitely. It's incremental. It should work in the current system. It should work better. Not there's no compromise, and all of it will be improved, and that will just be another layer of more and more potential being fulfilled. Just a small example of that: you've had teachers in your school that have used the flipped classroom approach, which is one example of these alternative methods where children are encouraged to self-construct their knowledge. So you had to do the reading outside of class, come in and be ready to discuss and answer questions and think and debate. And then the essay, you could just rattle it off because you really understood the topic, you practiced debating it, and then when your opinion had to be expressed, it just came out very natural, right? And you can imagine that if you go to another classroom that's not taught that way, you can still try to figure out how to understand the topic deeply. You might have to do a bit of extra work yourself, or you just say, listen, this topic, I'm not interested in it, I'll just do it that way, and I'll get the grade. And so you just have more control over your own destiny. You at least have that option. Whereas if you're just in the system and not understanding what's going on, you don't even have that option available to you. Of course, if you and the system are working together, so much better.
Mm. Okay, I want to try and just recap what you said to make sure I understood you correctly. So let's take the example of a child that wants, the end goal is they want to be a doctor in our current system. So what you're essentially saying is they can go to an innovative nursery, and then they'll learn about autonomy, freedom, and they'll get all the skills that they need from there. They can then, two options, either go into the original system, which is your typical high school and elementary school and middle school, or they can then go into an innovative school. If they end up choosing the innovative school, they will have these extra capabilities and competencies that the kids in the other schools don't have, but they will still have the choice and the option to go to university, because those same skills which the kids are learning in the other school, like math and science, are also being taught in your school, in the innovative school, maybe in a different way, but they have the skills to recognize, okay, if I want to get into Harvard, or if I want to get into McGill, and I want to do an undergraduate in medicine, I need a 1300 on the SAT. I've learned all these concepts about math. I haven't necessarily memorized anything, but because I'm skilled at having that fundamental understanding of math, I can quickly learn how to pass the SAT. And then once they're in university, they will be able to go through the system, but they will have that awareness of knowing why they are going through that system, and they'll know the purpose of it, and they won't just be like a sheep in the herd. They, unlike the other kids who are just, climbing up the ladder, which leads to nowhere, and they don't know what they want out of it, the kids coming from the innovative school will know precisely what they want to extract from a university degree. Is there
Yeah,
something you could
absolutely,
add?
absolutely, and I'm sure if you and to all the any university students you speak to, um, usually you'll know friends or people that get good grades, but they're very different in terms of their readiness for life, right?
Mm,
Usually you'll be aware of certain people where you say, okay, this person is just a machine, a test taking machine. This other person is much broader than that. They're able to get the grades, but there's this depth to them. What is that? That'll typically be through different parenting. Maybe along their educational path, they got that one or two teachers that flip things around, literally, pun intended, and expose them, and something clicked inside of them. So what we're saying here is, this is not to go and live another life. This is to succeed better at those very same professions and entrepreneurial projects or any kind of work that these universities are preparing students for. It's just doing more of that work. So if your parents knew a little bit about this and they knew more, you would get more of that. The more exposure you get, the better. And how that looks is, there's a journalist I follow, and he said to his son, if you wanna go to university and study a profession, you're wasting my money. University should be to go and study things like philosophy. And then, if you want to study a profession, so if you've studied philosophy and you know how to think about things, you can reflect on things, and then you study medicine. And I'm not saying you need a 3-year degree in philosophy, especially if it's a 3-year copy-paste, knowledge download. But how to build philosophical thinking, and you can do that on YouTube. And books. You then approach medicine in a very different way, because you're now asking yourself why, rather than just following, as you said, following the herd. And you could be that doctor that wonders, why isn't there in this, in these 7 years of med school, why is there so little emphasis on nutrition? And the person who doesn't ask the question says, well, because everybody else is doing it, can't be important. But the person that asks the question has that autonomy, will explore it, and maybe there's an answer. And maybe there's something surprising, which is, well, we kind of forgot about nutrition. The world is learning it on the side, outside of the profession, and putting pressure on the profession. So why don't they integrate it into the profession? And things like functional medicine start to come up, and and better ways of doing this. But who are those people? They're the ones who retain their intrinsic motivation, have autonomy, can self-construct their knowledge. And you don't need a special school for that. It's the adults in your life when you're young that can nurture that. It already exists in you. But the more we do that, the better. And it is very much in the same system, and then you can do well and even do better. I mean, that's the whole point of this, is that you should be able to both do better and be happier in these things. But yeah, it's not to completely move away. I mean, do we need the medical profession? Absolutely. Do we need universities, hubs where students of this age come together and network and find, as they're trying to discover, what will I do and how will I do it and who am I as an individual, find like-minded peers? Absolutely. But if I get some of that earlier, I can still go into these existing systems and do it differently and do it better and do it in a more autonomous way, basically.
Yep. Okay, so 4 hours later, this has come to the end of the podcast, and genuinely learned so much from it. So thank you. I appreciate your time. I know you don't have to do this, and you're a busy entrepreneur, and we're all waiting for you to open these schools. So we have somewhere to send our children. So best of luck with that.
Thank you.
And yeah, is there anything you want? Any final words?
No, I think just thanks for the opportunity, and I think the work that you're doing is an example of this autonomy, and carving out your path. So well done, and best of luck.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
All right. See you.
Yeah. Bye.